Hey guys, a bit of a quiet week this week, so there's a bit of time to do some thinking about some other topics. And one of them that we've been sort of talking about sort of for the last couple of years, especially with South African players going overseas, has been the player drain, and there's quite a bit there that we can talk about because obviously Jake White's been one of those who's been advocating for players to only play in South Africa. If you want to play for the Springboks, obviously he wants the URC teams to be stronger. You can every URC coach is probably going to say the same thing as well, and they're probably going to all want Springboks to play in South Africa. There's obviously a downside to that as well. With the way the current global season, the never-ending season since COVID, works, is that the Springboks obviously go straight from URC into the Rugby Championship, into the international season, and then never really get this proper off-season that other teams get. South African players go into the Curry Cup as well. Now, they've tried to mitigate this by giving players 8 weeks off, 8 consistent weeks, but it doesn't always work. One of the problems is, where do you give these players 8 weeks off? You've got to have two separate squads almost, because you're a squad that's playing the Curry Cup, and I still advocate the Curry Cup should be seen as a development competition nowadays. The rugby's just changed too much. But if you've got players who you want to play in the Curry Cup and those fringe players in the URC, somewhere you've got to give those guys 8 weeks off. Now, that's a bit of a conundrum for a coach, and the same with the Springboks, because if you think their season goes from June, when they get together in the Bok camps, July they have the tests, August, September they're going to Rugby Championship, which goes to the end of October. Then in November there's the Autumn Internationals up north. So then they get back to their franchises in December. And their franchises haven't seen them yet. Franchises desperately want them to play for them. They want to obviously have some good URC results. And then that cycle just repeats itself. And somewhere along the line, they have to give 8 weeks. Now, what's happened so far is that those players have been given 8 weeks off, not consecutively, but usually when the Six Nations is on, a lot of them go take their time off. It's not a perfect system. It doesn't work very well, let's be very honest. We need a global season to sort this out. South Africa is in a much worse position than most places around the world for this. And this is not a new argument. We've had this argument for the last couple of years, and we haven't really seen a thing. So now, taking that, you say, why don't more South African players play in South Africa? Obviously, the rand is weaker than other currencies. The euro dominates the yen and the dollar. And if you can go play for earning 3 times or 4 times your salary, who wouldn't say yes to that in any job, not just rugby? So you can understand why players make that move. So then it comes to the thing, you look at football. Football players move around the world all the time, and it works for football quite well. So there's been this argument about the transfer system. Should we have a transfer system in rugby? It gets a bit complicated. At the moment, the way it works, most players move within 3 months or 6 months, so they can start negotiating 6 months from their contract, and where their contract finishes, and then they can talk to other clubs, etc. But most of them move when their contract ends. There's very few examples where you see a team buying out a player from the URC side. It does happen. Trevor Niakani was bought from the Bulls by, I think it was Racing or Stade France, one of the French sides. Can't remember which one he played for right now. But he was bought out. There's a couple of these that you see the players get bought out of their contracts. And the whole idea about that was that you can make back some of your money of it. Now, that works in football quite well. Transfer fees are openly, players' salaries are openly known. Rugby is a bit more clandestine. Rugby doesn't like to have these things known. I'm not quite sure why. I think a lot of it should become more open and more transparent, but it doesn't really happen. Now, so the key to a transfer thing is, in football they sign a lot longer contracts. So a player will sign for 5-6 years. Over here in rugby, agents don't really want players to sign for that long. They want to move them, so they don't really want their players to be around at the club for too long. The unions have tried to counter that. A lot of the players, they try and sign for 3 or 4 years. Often the players don't want to do that because they know as well, in 3 or 4 years, if things go well, they probably move off to an overseas club as well. So it's a bit of a conundrum that rugby sits in, right? So One thing is clear that in the last couple of years, it's not as bad as it was when Alistair Coetzee was coach, when they tried to make it just Springboks playing out of South Africa. It didn't work at that stage. I think the fact that we were still in Super Rugby then probably had a huge impact to that. The fact that we're in the URC now, we play in Europe, we have our players playing the European, the Investec Champions Cup, and so there's a lot more exposure to Northern Hemisphere rugby. So that's not so much of a draw card. When you can play in those conditions and you can still have the South African lifestyle, that helps a lot for players. And there's at the end of this season, South Africa will become a full partner in the EPCR, which means there'll be a lot more money, a lot more. The travel expenses will be spread even more evenly, and it won't be up to South Africa, SA Rugby to cover a lot of this stuff. That's been the case till now. So there should be a better financial situation going ahead as well. Saying that, would a transfer system work? Well, yes and no. I think there are cases for it, and case by case. But there was quite a strong argument made by Jake White about it in a press conference at the end of last week. It went a bit unnoticed, but I thought maybe it's worth in a quiet week like this to talk about it. He reckons it won't stop clubs from coming to buy our players. And as soon as you open that door, a lot of them will go. I'm not quite sure it will work that much. I think players anyway now sort of go at the end of their contracts. If they want to go overseas, they do. And we're seeing more players come back to South Africa. I think there's always going to be a certain amount of players that do end up playing overseas anyway. But we're seeing more players come back to South Africa. So, yeah, to me, a transfer system could work. I think a lot more transparency wouldn't be a bad thing in rugby in terms of salaries. But there are salary caps. And, a lot of that sort of thing is to make sure that there's financial responsibility. We've seen in the French top 14 how teams have been sort of relegated to the second division, to Pro D2, if they don't follow that sort of financial. And we've seen in England as well, there's been a lot of scrutiny of the salary caps, and teams get around it. Now, I'm not sure every South African franchise is within the salary cap. The salary cap over here is, of course, I think it's 80 million, which is for the entire squad, and that you have to contract 50 players from that. There's no ways I see some of those franchises being within that, but as long as they're financially viable, I think that's the main thing. I think the big thing, though, is that you've got to live within your means, and we've got good players in South Africa. We've got a lot of talent. We need to utilize that talent well, and we need to remunerate the players for their talents as well. But yeah, somehow you got to also stop those overseas clubs from sweeping in and buying a player out of contract. The Bulls have been particularly one of those, because we've already seen that Munster wanted to buy Mornay Smith. We've seen some talk about some Piwe Matanzima going to the Sharks, things like that. Both players are in contract, so they can't really go. So it's just interesting seeing that, and I think the more successful South Africa becomes in Europe, the more there will be a need to sign their players from other clubs. And how they're going to stop that, I'm not quite sure. But listen, let's have a listen to Jake's arguments, and you tell me in the comments afterwards, what do you think? Do you think a transfer system can work for rugby? And if not, why not? Anyway, let's listen to Jake.
Okay. It's a very interesting thing. For the very first time this week, Edgar said something to me which I'm not saying I never thought about, but it resonated with me. What's happened is, over time, because all this mass exodus of all these good players has happened, we're actually sitting with another problem, which I never again understood it, but it's hit me this week. Is there a lot of young players that have now the expectation that they need to earn massive amounts of money because they are now playing senior rugby, and they wouldn't have in the real world. And the expectation is that if you don't pay them that money, they then will go overseas. So in effect, the franchises are actually shooting themselves in the foot, because we are paying guys that are coming out of junior rugby in the market value far too much in comparison to what they used to get in the old days. And so I go back to what you said, is that's why I'm so reluctant to say let's make it an open market, because you'll never be able to build a team. I mean, what will happen is the team that's got, you'll be in the business of selling rugby players it'll be like commodity trading of rugby players out of South Africa. Think about it. So the guy who signs the best juniors and brings them through the quickest is the guy that on the stock market is going to make the most amount of money. It's got nothing to do with how many games you win. It's got nothing to do with how good your team is. It's got to do with how many of those players you can get off the conveyor belt. And so I think the Premiership, as you used your example, the football's different. Football's very different. And I'll tell you why. Because you can arrive on a Thursday and play for your country if you've been at your club the whole week. You can't get to a rugby game on a Thursday night and play for your country on a Saturday. Rugby's just too many things you have to coach and get right, and combinations and all that sort of stuff. And again, they're just different sports. Not saying one is better than the other. Our sport just doesn't work where you get together. I mean, in the old days, I'm old enough to tell you this, when the Springboks used to assemble, they had 72 hours that day. In the old days, you had 72 hours when you could assemble. And that thing's gone now to a week before Test match 2, you can have 3 days extra out of the window. And the reason for that is because rugby teams take longer to get together and get cohesion before they play Test matches. So it's something that I don't know. Again, I'm going to answer this question by asking you a question. Why is so many people so adverse to the fact that we would like stronger franchises and provincial sides in South Africa? Why is that shooting in the stars? Every team in South Africa wants to have the best players playing the best rugby the longest time together, because that model works, guys. I mean, that model works. South Africa, the national team have shown you. How many, let's turn it around. How many players are the national team allowed to pick in camps? How many? Anyone know? No. Okay, is there a cutoff? No. Okay, but there's a cutoff in the squad you can have in URC. Is there a salary cap in the Springboks? Is there, guys? Okay, so why is there one in a franchise? Now, all I'm trying to say to you is if it works at national level, and it does, why is everyone so adverse to the fact that we would like that same model to be in place with the franchises? Why? I don't understand. We want the best players playing the most, with the biggest depth, with the access to rotating the squad, with the most time together so that we can have them over long periods of time. All the things that are making our national team strong. And so that's why that model, to answer your question, that's why in rugby it doesn't work. It's not rugby is very simple. You need players, you need lots of time together, you need cohesion, and all those things work at national level. All the franchises, and I'm talking on behalf of myself, all the franchises, I'm sure, in every province is asking for exactly the same thing.
One thing about Jake is he'll never give up on his fight there, and he's going to fight this battle. Probably won't win it in the end, but he certainly is going to be vocal about it and make people think about it. So let me know what you think about his argument. Let me know what you think if rugby can have a transfer system. If teams in South Africa will survive if there's a proper transfer system, or will all our talent go overseas? It's an interesting one. It's certainly food for thought. But anyway, thank you for watching again. If you haven't already, please smash that subscribe button and let me know your comments. I'll read them all. Cheers.